All right, so my name is Jeff Howe. I am an executive bourbon steward, whiskey enthusiast, and the president and founder of the Hallowed Order of Whiskey Enthusiasts, which is our kind of local whiskey club here. We've been doing, what, about 6 months maybe?
Something like that, yeah.
Get together once a month, try different whiskeys. Every evening has a certain theme, whether it is a style of whiskey, a brand of whiskey. But we get together and have some beverages and just enjoy each other's company, mostly.
Depends on who's there.
Yeah, it depends on who's there. All right, so your copper stills, kind of the foundation of any distilled spirit. On the right-hand side, you have a pot still, which was the traditional way of using a still. You put your mash or your beer in the still, you heat it up to about 190 degrees, which is when alcohol starts to turn to vapor, and it goes through its little process and condenses, and you get your distilled spirit or your liquor. A lot of times with a pot still, you distill multiple times. 3 and 4 is pretty standard. Some distilleries go up to 6 times for a regular pot still. And on the left-hand side, you have a more modern column or hybrid still. It does everything that the pot still does, but instead of having to do it multiple times, each one of these, I don't know how my laser pointer to actually work, but each one of those little glass portholes is a copper plate. So it actually distills, each time it passes through one of those copper plates is a separate distillation. So it just, it allows a much faster turnaround of product. So most of your commercial distilleries, whether it's Scotch, bourbon, whiskey, whatever, they use a hybrid still at this point in time. You still have some that use your traditional pot stills, and they usually do that as a, they usually market it that it is a pot stilled whiskey. You'll see it a lot with Irish whiskey, and there are certain bourbon distilleries that still do strictly pot distilled as well.
So Jeff, are all spirits done this way? Vodka?
Yes, so any liquor is going to be distilled one of
Just
these
depends on
one of these ways.
what they use to
Correct.
make it.
Or I mean, you can do your, moonshine still, but they're all basically, even a moonshine still is based off of your copper pot still. Some of them are rounded, they're not, they may not have that nice conical head, but they're all based on that same concept. So whiskey, we throw the term around. It could be, some people want to argue that bourbon and whiskey are 2 different things, but they are actually synonymous terms. Bourbon is whiskey, but not all whiskey is bourbon. Same with Scotch. All Scotch is whiskey, but not all whiskey is Scotch. So a whiskey is any distilled spirit that is distilled from cereal grains or malted cereal grains. So rye, wheat, rice, corn, barley, millet, and sorghum. Now, your top probably 4 here, 5 here are going to be rye. Oh, I got wheat on there twice. Rye, wheat, corn, and barley are going to be your top distilling grains. Sorghum, rice, millet are kind of on the back. They're more experimental at this point in time. You don't see too many sorghum whiskeys out there. I'm not going to say it's not going to happen because people are always experimenting and trying to come up with something new. But to be considered whiskey, distillers around the world kind of have a consensus as far as what it is. It's got to be distilled below 190 proof. It's got to be aged in some kind of oak container, and it's got to be bottled at a minimum proof of 80 proof. You're going to see flavored whiskeys, Fireball, Screwball, what's another, like caramel whiskeys. They can't technically be called whiskey because a lot of them are bottled at a very minimal proof. They've got additives in them, so they don't actually match up to the preferred definition of what a whiskey actually is. But because the base spirit is whiskey, they're allowed to call it a cinnamon whiskey. So the term whiskey itself originates from Gaelic, which is Ushgabai, meaning water of life. It's actually borrowed from Latin, which aqua vita, or aqua vitae, depending on your Latin. So categories whiskey. You're also going to see multiple different spellings of the word whiskey. So sometimes the word whiskey is spelled with an EY, sometimes it's just KY. And the reason is because typically the agreed rule is if there is an E in the country of origin, you're going to spell it with an EY. If there is not an E, you're going to spell it with a Y. It's not a hard and fast rule because you're going to see like Old Forester, which is a bourbon, they're going to spell Old Forester bourbon whiskey with a Y because they're paying homage to Scotland. Because their family came from Scotland back in the day. So there's really no hard and fast rule. It's kind of whatever the distiller decides that they're going to do. So you've got really two different types of bourbon. You've got Kentucky bourbon, straight bourbon. At its basest definition, bourbon has to meet the following criteria. It's got to be produced in the United States, 1964, I think. Lyndon B. Johnson, one of the only good things he did was to say that bourbon is a unique product of the United States. Up until that point, bourbon could come from anywhere. During Prohibition, a lot of distillers went to Mexico and were making Mexican bourbon and bringing it up into the United States, smuggling it during Prohibition. Four Roses is one of those distilleries that moved production down into Mexico and then came north after that. To be a bourbon, the mash bill has to be at least 51% corn. So the majority of the cereal grain is going to be corn. And any time you see a whiskey name, whether it's rye, wheat, corn, malt, whatever it's called, that's the primary cereal grain that's in it. So to be a wheat whiskey, it's got to be 51% or more wheat. And then the other things in there are basically your flavoring grains that just add different character to it. Bourbon has to be distilled at or below 160 proof. It goes into a new oak barrel, or oak container actually, at or below 125 proof. And the only thing you can add to bourbon whiskey is water. And that's just to proof it down, whether you're bottling it or you're just trying to fill up a barrel. So, and there is no age requirement. As long as it touches a charred oak container, it is bourbon. So it could really be in for 2 minutes, not that anybody does that, and it's bourbon. Irish whiskey must be produced and aged in Ireland. Let me go back there for just 1 second. So Kentucky bourbon has to be made in Kentucky. There's arguments all over about who makes the best bourbon. Kentucky will say that they do. Indiana is probably, in terms of volume, almost as big as Kentucky in distillation. Fun fact: there is enough bourbon in the state of Kentucky for every man, woman, and child in the world to have 5 shots of bourbon. Okay. So when the shit hits the fan, go to Kentucky and grab some bourbon. Straight bourbon whiskey. It's a legal definition. Straight bourbon whiskey has to be aged at least 2 years. There's no requirement for age statements on bourbon. Typically the older, when we think of whiskey, the older it is, the better it is. Bourbon has no age statement. If you see that it's straight bourbon, you know that it's at least 2 years old. Bottled in bond, and this goes for all whiskey, is at least 4 years old, bottled at 100 proof. If there's no age statement and it says straight bourbon, it's going to be 2 years or younger, or at least 2 years old. Now it could have 8-year bourbon in it, but because the youngest spirit in there is 2 years old, it's got to be called 2-year-old bourbon. Irish whiskey must be made in Ireland. It is fermented by the action of yeast, and these are all legal definitions. They've got to be distilled to a maximum of 189.6 proof, put into wooden casks, not exceeding 185 gallons for at least 3 years. So all Irish whiskey is at least 3 years old if it is called Irish whiskey. And you've got a couple other types of Irish whiskey. Irish whiskey, Scotch, American whiskey, Canadian whiskey can all add caramel coloring. Okay, so, and that's just for consistency of batch, because depending on the barrels, a lot of times these guys are using recycled barrels, so they use a lot of old bourbon barrels, wine barrels, and that sort of thing. So just to get consistency from batch to batch, they're allowed to add caramel coloring. Malt Irish whiskey, only malted barley and water in pot stills at a single distillery. A pot still Irish whiskey made from malted and unmalted barley only in pot stills. Grain is unmalted cereal grains made in the column still, and then blended is a blend between Irish whiskey made in both types of still. So you're going to see the term blended a lot, and pretty much every variety of whiskey has its own definition of what blended means, which is utterly confusing. Scotch whiskey, two types. 2 types of Scotch and 3 types of blended Scotch whiskey. Now, keep in mind here, whiskey is with a Y, not an EY. They all must abide by the following. Produced and aged in Scotland, made utilizing natural enzymes for malted barley in its sugar conversion. Now, why do they have that in there? Nobody knows. No, so you're not allowed to use other chemicals to get that enzymatic reaction to get sugar out of malt. So it has to be a natural process. Distilled to a maximum of 189.6 degrees, or proof. Put into casks, again, not exceeding 185 gallons, again, for at least 3 years. The only thing that they can add is caramel coloring. And depending on your region of Scotland, malt is generally smoked with burning peat to dry the malted barley. The smokiness associated with Scotch is due to the peat, not the barrel it is aged in, which is pretty incredible that smoke flavor goes through that distillation process and is still imparted in that final spirit. Scotch production generally utilizes secondhand barrels, like we talked about a minute ago. So the most popular one is bourbon barrels, because here in the United States, to be bourbon, it has to go into a brand new charred oak container. So they have all of this cooperage, all these barrels that they have to get rid of. They send it to Scotland or Ireland, and then those barrels are recycled. Lots of wineries also use bourbon barrels. And now the newest thing is maple syrup. Maple syrup aged in bourbon barrels is like a huge upcoming industry. So here, the barrel itself, unlike bourbon, the barrel does not impart much flavor. All that flavor has really been pulled out from the bourbon. Think about it like a tea bag, where that, if you try to reuse a tea bag, you're not getting a very good cup of tea out of that second cup. It's going to be, light brown water. Basic Scotch, you've got single malt and single grain, not the same thing. The term malt does not necessarily refer to the grain at all, or malted barley. What it means is that it's a single malt. It means that malt was malted at a single distillery in a single season using only barley and water. Single grain is a spirit produced at a single distillery using multiple grains, even though it's called single grain, in addition to water and malted barley. Single refers again to the distillery source, not the grains. Okay, and the reason they do this is because every distillery wants their own bragging rights. They all want to be better than the other guy, because there's a lot of distilleries in Scotland. Blended malt Scotch is 2 or more single malt Scotches from 2 different distilleries, or 2 or more different distilleries. Blended grain, 2 or more single grain Scotch whiskeys from different distilleries, and then blended Scotch is 1 or more of the single malt Scotch whiskeys with 1 or more single grain Scotch whiskeys. So, utterly confusing. Okay, and they must have been drinking when they came up with these rules. It's the only thing that I can
It was Scotland
figure.
too.
What's that?
It was Scotland too.
And yeah, I mean, so you've got some different types of scotch. And you're gonna see on either the bottles or the boxes, these terms. You're gonna see Speyside, you're gonna see Lowlands or Highland Scotch. This is really gonna give you the key to what that final flavor in the bottle is gonna taste like. Speyside is about 2/3 of the distilleries in Scotland. 50 to 60 distilleries operate in that Speyside little pink area right there. Two flavors typically make these up: grassy and rich, or sweet and sherry-like. Some good representations are Glenlivet, Macallan, and Glenrothes, I guess. I've never seen that one or had it. I don't know. I've had the Glenlivet and the Macallan. You've got Lowlands. They are light in body and aroma and traditionally used as blending whiskeys. So a lot of times when you have a blended scotch, these Lowland scotches are what's going into those blended barrels. Typically begin sweet and finishes dry. There are 5 different distilleries in the Lowlands region, often referred to as Lowland ladies, because they're easy to drink. They're not smacky in the face smoky. It's just an easy sipping whiskey. So, yeah, they doesn't put hair in your chest, I guess. Highland Scotch. This has the greatest variation in style. They can be light, fruity, and dry. Eastern Highland whiskey tends to be fruity and full-bodied with little to no smokiness. Glenmorangie, Dalmore are pretty good examples. I know you can get those here in the state store. I've never seen Glen Ord, not that I look for scotch too often, but I haven't seen that one here in our state stores. Next, you've got Islay Scotch. Okay, I know it says Islay, but it's Islay. Here at 8 Working Distilleries, this is going to be your smack you in the face peat smoke scotch. Lagavulin, Ardbeg, Laphroaig's, super salty, super smoky. Tastes like you're drinking a campfire, in my opinion. I am not a fan of the Islay Scotch typically, but everybody likes their own thing. You got to try it to decide whether it's for you or not. So the distillery that's in our presentation is Bruichladdich, and this other one that I'm not even going to try to pronounce. They use lightly peated or unpeated barley to produce more malt forward whiskey, and the malt just gives it sweetness. So if you think Irish whiskey has that nice sweet start, that's going to be these guys. Now, each of those distilleries also make some crazy smoky scotches as well, some Islay Scotch. But their new thing is to try to get away from that crazy smoke. Island Scotches, technically part of the Highland region, but there are 7 distinct distilleries that operate there. And I'll just go down because I know we're running short here on time. If you look at those, again, each one has its own style. If you guys are into super smoky scotches, if you look at the Isle of Mull, they make what they call a peat monster, which I'm sure when you crack it open, it probably smells like a campfire in your house. I guess Ledaig. Yeah, Ledaig, something like that. Yeah, so kind of like, again, each island has its own distillery, or its own style. Campbelltown once produced about almost 1 million gallons of liquor every year through the 19th century. Distillers could not keep up with demand, quality plummeted, and they started doing some shady practices here. At one point, their whiskey was referred to as stinking fish. Not something I want to drink there, I don't think. So only 3 distilleries remain here, and they've they definitely tried to bring their quality and their standards back up. But I mean, demand for scotch is not what it once was. But these whiskeys are lightly peated and result in a sweet and fruity, lightly spicy, salty whiskey. Canadian whiskey, all right? You're gonna hear it called rye whiskey, but it's not always rye whiskey. These are the only, by legal definition, they're the only ones that can add flavoring to their whiskey. So, and still be called whiskey, which is why you've got the Crown Royal in all these different flavors. It's Crown Royal whiskey, but it's still by legal definition whiskey because of what the Canadian government said that they can do. So they can do flavoring and caramel coloring, but again, it's got to be at least 3 years old. Japanese whiskey, these guys are kind of the newcomers on the world whiskey scene. They have been inspired by Scotch whiskey production, and a lot of their whiskey reads very much Scotch. And they do kind of an Islay style. They tend to go more smoky, more in your face, as far as their flavor profiles. And they use Mizunara oak for aging, which also kind of imparts their own unique flavors. Indian whiskey, these guys are kind of new on the whiskey scene as well. Any questions? I had not tried Indian whiskey, so I can't answer any questions to that. Yeah, go ahead.
I'll venture a question because I'm not knowledgeable at all about whiskey, but I've seen that. Is Johnny Walker a whiskey?
Yeah, so Johnny Walker is a Scotch.
Right.
Yep.
Now, I know there's a Johnny Walker that's a label red, and then one that's a black label. What's the difference?
Price. And age.
Okay.
So I'm not well versed on my Johnny Walkers, but I know that each different label color is an age, and as you get older, you get way more expensive. And that's what actually I did want to say that really quick too. So anytime you see an age statement on a bottle of whiskey. Okay, so if I go out today and I buy a 20-year-old bottle of Johnny Walker, and I let it sit on my shelf for 20 years, it is still only a 20-year-old bottle of Scotch, because it is age statement in the barrel, not in the bottle, because once it is out of the barrel, it stops aging. Now, it can oxidize, so once you open it and you pour it, the flavor profiles will change over time because of oxidation. Never goes bad. But once it's out of the barrel, the aging stops. So,
Is there a point at which, age-wise, it's not drinkable? Like, you see auctions for very
what happens
old-
is
Yeah.
it evaporates. So
Right.
at a certain point, you're not going to get return out of your barrel and be able to sell it at a worthwhile cost, because like there's 23-year-old Kentucky bourbons that are 1/3 of a barrel full, and that's why that's like your Pappy Van Winkles, and you're spending a ton of money on it because you're only getting a few bottles out of that barrel. Scotland has a little bit more grace because their climate is so mild, so they can let stuff age much longer without fears of evaporation. But no, it will never spoil if it's distilled correctly.
Right.
Yeah, it doesn't spoil, which is why it's called water of life. It was a way that farmers found to preserve their grains before means of preservation. So, yeah.